It started with the kind of crash that doesn't just wake you up, it rips you out of sleep and into survival mode. One moment I was dreaming about something mundane, mowing the backyard maybe, then came the sound, a metallic thud, sharp and final, followed by the unmistakable clatter of glass shards scattering across hardwood. I jolted upright in bed, heart hammering like a war drum, lungs refusing to draw a full breath. The clock glared 3:04 a.m. in angry red digits. For a moment I told myself it could have been the cat or a branch or some harmless mistake. But then I heard the front door creak open. Not swing open, creak like it had been forced. My skin prickled. We lived in a supposedly gated lakefront community in Northern Virginia, the kind where people jog in coordinated athleisure and wave politely without ever learning your name. It wasn't perfect, but it was supposed to be safe. My wife stirred beside me, but not like someone scared. More like someone who had just been waiting. I glanced over, her eyes were already open, calm and unreadable. "Stay here," I whispered. "Wait," she said. Her voice was low, steady. Not a whisper. Just firm. She swung her legs off the bed and stood, pulling on the sweatshirt she always kept folded on the corner chair. I reached under the bed for my phone with shaking fingers, ready to call 911. But what would I even say? "There's a man in our house saying he's HOA security?" It sounded ridiculous. And yet, that's exactly what the voice said next. Loud, masculine, laced with smug authority. "This is an official HOA inspection. You're in violation. Open up." That's when it clicked. He wasn't calling from the front porch. He was inside the house. I could hear his boots on the wooden floor. They weren't stomping like a burglar or panicked like someone caught. No, this guy walked like he belonged here. My breath caught in my throat. I didn't move. But my wife. She was already out of the bedroom, her movements silent and fluid. Not rushed. Calculated. I followed her to the hallway, heart hammering so loud I swore he could hear it downstairs. She opened the linen closet. Not to grab towels or a blanket. No, she reached behind the second shelf and popped off a panel I never even knew was removable. Inside, under the folded sheets, was a small black case. She opened it in one practiced flick of the latch. I leaned over her shoulder, confused, still half asleep but running on panic. I expected a gun. What I saw instead stopped me cold. It was a badge. Not a police badge, not a fake mall cop shield, but a real one. It was matte black with a gold inlay, and 3 letters burned themselves into my brain the second I saw them. "See? You're kidding me," I whispered. She didn't answer. Just tucked the badge into her waistband and turned toward the stairs. "You're not supposed to," I began, but she cut me off with one sharp look. Not angry, just focused. Like this wasn't new to her. Like she'd done this before. The man downstairs had started opening cabinets, drawers, making noise like he was looking for something. Evidence, maybe. My wife stepped softly, carefully to the top of the stairs and called out in a voice I had never heard before, cool, commanding, and dangerous. "Identify yourself." The voice that answered didn't belong to anyone trained. "HOA security," the man barked back. "You're in violation of Code 42B. I don't have to explain myself." Then I heard it, paper rustling, maybe a clipboard, as if he was pretending this was some bizarre formality. That's when she descended the stairs. Slowly. Like a shadow stretching under moonlight. The man finally came into view, and when he saw her, he paused. He wasn't expecting anyone to confront him. Definitely not her. Blonde hair in a messy bun, baggy sweatshirt with Old Navy, faded across the chest, bare feet, and yet she radiated the kind of chill authority that makes grown men freeze. "You broke into a private residence," she said coolly. "That makes you a felon. So unless you can prove jurisdiction, you're going to be detained under federal statute." The man scoffed. "Lady, do you even know who I work for?" he said, puffing up like a sitcom bully. My wife reached into her waistband and held up her badge. No flash, no drama, just a quiet certainty that made the room go still. "Do you?" she asked. And for the first time the fake cop blinked. He took one slow step backward, the kind of movement a predator makes when realizing it's wandered into another predator's den. Upstairs I was still frozen, processing what I'd just seen. My wife, who always said she used to work in government logistics, had just outed herself as something else entirely. And the man who kicked down our door? He'd picked the worst possible house in the neighborhood to break into. You'd think after a moment like that, a man would have questions. And I did, hundreds of them. But shock has a strange way of filing everything into slow motion. I couldn't even speak as she escorted the guy to the floor, zip-tied his wrists with a plastic restraint pulled from the same linen closet, and called in someone, on a secure phone I didn't even know we owned. My wife. The woman I met 9 years ago at a friend's Labor Day barbecue. The same one who'd spent years quietly tending her herb garden, doing yoga in the guest room and pretending to forget garbage day. And now I watched her issue silent hand signals, check for weapons, and speak in coded language like she was running an op inside our lakefront colonial. She wasn't just calm, she was trained. And for the first time since moving here, I started to realize how little I actually knew about her past. Her cover had been perfect. She told everyone she was a government contractor, logistics side, dealing with procurement and supply chain management. It was vague enough to be believable, boring enough to kill further interest. The neighbors mostly ignored us, save for the occasional passive-aggressive comment about our non-compliant mailbox color or that one time our lawn grew half an inch too long. I, on the other hand, was just a regular guy, small business owner, ran a remote web security company from home, preferred flannel to polos and liked my peace and quiet. I didn't ask too many questions about her past because, frankly, I didn't think there was anything to ask. And then there was the HOA. Oh, the Homeowners Association. They were the real local authority around here, or so they liked to believe. Headed by a woman we all called Sandra, though behind her back the neighborhood had other, less generous names for her. Sandra wasn't elected so much as she seized the position, nominated herself when no one else wanted the headache, then turned that authority into a miniature kingdom. She went after firewood piles that weren't stacked aesthetically. She fined an elderly couple for hanging a flag at the wrong angle. She once issued a warning to a single mother whose toddler's tricycle was left out on the porch overnight. Curbside disorderliness, she called it. If you didn't show up to board meetings, she'd cite you. If you disagreed, she'd threaten legal action. I tried to keep a low profile, but even I wasn't immune. We'd already had a few run-ins with her over the fence height in our backyard and the unauthorized fire pit I installed. She'd also tried to say my wife wasn't listed on the residency roster, implying she didn't technically live here, so we had no voting rights. That had been our last warning letter. And when my wife didn't even blink at it, I assumed she just didn't want to give Sandra the satisfaction. Turns out she probably had bigger fish to fry. But looking back, there had been hints, little things I'd brushed off as quirks. She never sat with her back to the door in restaurants. She once disarmed a malfunctioning security alarm in under 5 seconds without breaking eye contact with me. And then there was the camping trip where a bear got a little too close, and she grabbed the flare gun with the kind of muscle memory that didn't come from REI weekend classes. Still nothing, not one of those red flags, had prepared me for seeing her flip a guy twice her size onto the floor at 3 a.m. like it was a Tuesday. The man she took down was no ordinary thug either. Once she'd restrained him, she began asking questions. Not loud, not angry, just controlled and precise. He claimed to be with HOA Enforcement Division. Problem was, there's no such thing. HOAs don't have enforcement agents who break into homes. What they do have are bitter little tyrants like Sandra, who seem to think filing paperwork gives them more power than law enforcement. But apparently, Sandra had hired this guy, a private security contractor with a fake badge and a real criminal record. My wife would later explain it like this: this wasn't his first rodeo. She's probably done this to others, just picked the wrong door this time. As for why Sandra wanted to harass us, we'd recently declined to pay a bogus fine related to unauthorized occupancy, a veiled accusation implying my wife wasn't a permanent resident and therefore violated the terms of residency. It didn't make sense then. It does now. We were a threat. A mystery. And in Sandra's HOA Fantasyland, that meant we had to be dealt with. So she sent someone. But what she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the woman I married wasn't just some quiet federal worker with a knack for basil and spreadsheets. She was something else entirely. And Sandra had just stumbled into a far bigger game than she ever imagined. It all officially started 2 weeks before the 3 a.m. break-in, though in hindsight the signs had been festering long before that. I came home from a grocery run to find a thick manila envelope taped to our door, flapping slightly in the spring wind. Notice of immediate HOA action was stamped in bold red font across the front like it was some kind of court summons. Inside were printed photos, taken from an awkward angle that suggested someone had been crouching behind the neighbor's hydrangeas, of our back deck, our driveway, even the kitchen window. I stood there, holding them, trying to make sense of what exactly I was being accused of. There was a typed letter, 4 pages long, full of legalese and highlighted subsections of the HOA charter, accusing us of violating multiple clauses. The big one? Unauthorized cohabitation. They were alleging that my wife wasn't on the original ownership paperwork and therefore wasn't allowed to live there full-time. That she was a non-approved long-term occupant, as if she were a squatter in her own home. I laughed at first. It was so absurd it almost felt like satire. We both lived here. Paid taxes here. Voted here. And yet some overzealous paperwork tyrant decided my wife was a trespasser in her own kitchen because of a missed checkbox on a years-old form? The letter warned of escalating fines if the unauthorized occupant didn't vacate the premises within 10 days. They even used the word eviction, which made my blood boil. HOA boards can be annoying, sure, but this was aggressive, personal, and wrong. I stormed into the kitchen, waving the envelope in the air like a madman. "You've got to be kidding me," I barked. My wife looked up from the sink, drying a plate like this was just any Tuesday. She raised an eyebrow but didn't say a word as I laid out the evidence on the counter. "They think you don't live here. That you're, I don't know, crashing on the couch or something." Still she didn't flinch. "They're poking," she said simply, folding the dish towel with mechanical precision. "What does that even mean?" "This is harassment." "It is," she agreed. But there was something in her voice, almost like she was expecting it. She didn't seem surprised at all. I, on the other hand, was furious. I spent the rest of the afternoon firing off angry emails to the HOA's generic inbox, CNG board members I'd never met and quoting actual housing laws I barely understood. I demanded clarification, proof of who filed the complaint, and how exactly they got those photographs. I heard nothing back. No apology. No explanation. Just silence. The kind of silence that's heavier than words. A few days later I saw her, Sandra, standing at the edge of our property, arms crossed, flanked by a lanky guy in cargo pants who looked like he played paintball on weekends and took it way too seriously. They weren't trying to be stealthy anymore. Just staring. Measuring. I walked outside, kept my voice polite but firm. "Can I help you with something?" Sandra smiled without smiling. "Just performing a routine exterior compliance check," she said, gesturing vaguely at my grass, my driveway, the very air I was breathing. "Making sure all residents are accounted for." Her emphasis on residents sent my pulse spiking. "You're not law enforcement," I replied. "You don't get to do surveillance." "It's not surveillance," she said sweetly. "It's property stewardship." Then she turned and walked away. I stood there for a long time, fists clenched, watching her disappear behind the hedge like she owned the damn earth beneath her feet. I went back inside and told my wife what had happened, but she barely reacted. "They're testing the water," she muttered. "Trying to figure out how far they can go." I wanted to push her. Ask her why she seemed to understand this dance so well. But I didn't, not yet. At the time I thought she was just being cautious, maybe from years of dealing with bureaucracy. I didn't know then that she'd seen real surveillance. That she'd led operations where quiet intimidation was just the first step in a playbook. What I did know was that this had stopped being about mailbox flags or lawn heights. This was now about control, about targeting my wife, our home, our right to exist peacefully. And the fact that it was coming from within our own supposedly safe community? That lit a fire in me I couldn't put out. I started documenting everything, printing emails, logging suspicious vehicles, taking photos of the compliance patrols that passed our house twice a day. Something bigger was happening. I could feel it, like the low rumble of a coming storm. I just didn't realize how far they'd go, or how badly they'd misjudge the woman they were targeting. Over the next 10 days the pressure didn't just build, it metastasized. What started as veiled threats and passive-aggressive letters from Sandra turned into a full-blown siege of our daily life. Every morning, without fail, someone from the compliance committee walked by our house, clipboard in hand, pretending to jot down notes while staring at our windows. Sometimes it was Sandra herself, sometimes the guy with the military cosplay pants, and sometimes a woman I'd never seen before who wore sunglasses even at night. I knew harassment when I saw it. And this wasn't about neighborhood aesthetics. This was personal. The day after the eviction warning expired, we got another envelope. This one slid under our door like something out of a noir thriller. It had no return address, just a printed document with the HOA's logo and another long-winded explanation of how we were now in active violation of Ordinance 17B and subject to escalating penalties. Escalating penalties turned out to be a $500 fine delivered with no due process. 2 days later it was $1,000. Then came a formal warning that legal action was being strongly considered, with possible referral to local authorities for enforcement. I nearly laughed out loud. Who did Sandra think she was, the sheriff of suburbia? But then it got worse. My mailbox was knocked clean off its post, twice. One morning I walked out and found a boot print on the door, the paint scuffed like someone had tried to force it open in the night. My tires were slashed, not all four, just one. Just enough to be inconvenient. Enough to make a point. I checked the security cameras, but somehow the footage had been scrambled, just static from 2:13 to 3:45 a.m., exactly the window I needed. I asked around the neighborhood, but most people wouldn't even meet my eyes. A few offered sympathetic shrugs, but no one said anything useful. It was like we'd become radioactive overnight. At the next HOA meeting, which I forced myself to attend, Sandra smiled like a reptile in pearls and opened the floor with a long, condescending speech about community cohesion and the importance of compliance. I waited for my turn to speak, but it never came. When I raised my hand, she ignored me. When I stood up, she called for a recess. When I protested, 2 private security guards, not local police but goons she had clearly hired, stepped forward and asked me to leave the premises for the integrity of the meeting. Integrity? These people were actively gaslighting me. Afterward, I walked out into the parking lot to find a courtesy violation sticker slapped across my windshield, citing unauthorized emotional disruption. I didn't even know that was a thing. I brought it home, showed it to my wife, and finally lost it. This is psychological warfare, I snapped, pacing the kitchen like a caged animal. This isn't about rules or regulations. This is targeted harassment. And I'm done playing nice. She watched me silently, arms crossed, her gaze unreadable. I expected sympathy. Maybe even support. What I got instead was a quiet, almost chilling reply. They've moved into phase 2, she said. What does that mean? I asked. They're trying to provoke a response. Push until you snap. Make you look like the aggressor. That's the trap. She said it so calmly, so analytically, it almost didn't register how serious she was. But I could feel it, that heavy, invisible shift in the air, like when someone turns a key in a locked door you didn't know existed. And if I don't respond? I asked. Then they escalate again, she said. They push harder. Get sloppier. That's when they make mistakes. I should have known then that she was speaking from experience. But I was too wrapped up in my own rage to see the precision in her words. She wasn't reacting like a wife under stress. She was analyzing a hostile operation. She didn't just understand the playbook. She'd written one. I tried reasoning with the HOA again. Sent letters, demanded meetings, even offered to resubmit any missing paperwork to clear things up. Each response was colder than the last. Compliance is non-negotiable, one reply said. This is a final notice. Another simply read, you've brought this on yourself. That one I printed and pinned to the fridge just to remind myself what kind of people we were dealing with. The stress started to seep into everything. I stopped sleeping. Stopped working. Every noise outside made my skin crawl. I checked locks twice, then 3 times. I stopped going for runs around the lake. I canceled a weekend trip we'd planned. The house didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a bunker. And still my wife remained composed. Watchful. Almost like she was waiting. I didn't know it then, but she'd already figured it out, already seen what I couldn't. That this wasn't just HOA overreach or suburban politics. This was something far darker. And it was about to reach its breaking point. The turning point came not with another letter or late-night scare tactic, but with silence. After weeks of non-stop intimidation, petty vandalism, and trumped-up violations, the harassment just stopped. No patrols. No new fines. No sightings of Sandra or her rent-a-cops skulking behind shrubs. At first, I thought maybe our complaints to the county housing board had finally landed somewhere, or that the emails I'd sent to the state attorney general's office had spooked someone into backing off. But my wife knew better. They're not retreating, she said, standing by the kitchen window, sipping coffee like she was reading weather patterns. They're repositioning. I looked out at the empty street, the calm too calm, and finally asked the question I'd been holding back since that first envelope appeared. How do you know all this? She didn't look at me when she answered. Because I used to train people to run these kinds of operations. Only difference is we were sanctioned by the US government. These clowns are doing it to protect hydrangeas. She said it so plainly, so matter-of-fact, that I nearly dropped my mug. Wait, I said slowly. Are you telling me this is familiar? Like actual tradecraft? She turned to face me then. Not professional but familiar. They're mimicking tactics. Pressure, isolation, baiting, escalation. It's sloppier but the bones are there. Somebody's guiding them. And just like that, the last puzzle piece clicked into place. This wasn't just Sandra being a power-drunk suburban tyrant. She had help. Someone with experience. Someone running point from the shadows, testing methods. That's when my wife changed gears. She disappeared into the garage and came back 20 minutes later with a weatherproof case the size of a toolbox. I'd never seen it before. It was locked with a biometric scanner. When it clicked open, I saw a laptop, a folder thick with printed files, and something that looked disturbingly like an ID scanner. "We're not going to play defense anymore," she said, flipping the laptop open and powering it up with military precision. "We're going to collect." Over the next 3 days, I watched my wife transform, not into someone different, but into someone I realized she had always been beneath the surface. She moved with quiet intensity, analyzing phone records, HOA filings, security footage from neighbors who owed her favors, and even tapping into the open-source surveillance feeds from traffic cameras. She mapped out the entire HOA hierarchy like it was a foreign cell network. She identified weaknesses, behavioral patterns, even the coffee order of Sandra's little clipboard goon. "They're using burner phones," she muttered one evening. "That means they're hiding their communication trail. But not well. They're lazy. Amateurs." I asked her how far she planned to take this. She didn't answer with words, just showed me the folder she'd compiled. It was a dossier. A full breakdown of every board member's background, assets, criminal records, and links to shady real estate deals. Turns out, Sandra's husband owned a shell company that had been quietly acquiring foreclosed properties in nearby neighborhoods, properties driven to foreclosure by aggressive HOA fines and strategic harassment. It wasn't just about power. It was profit. Every family driven out meant one more home scooped up for pennies on the dollar. "They wanted us out for the same reason," my wife said, tapping on a spreadsheet of HOA violations over the last 2 years. "But they didn't realize who they were trying to push." That night we drafted our plan. It wasn't flashy. It didn't involve confrontation or lawsuits. It involved information. The one thing more powerful than money or fear. We compiled the dossier into an anonymous file and prepared a series of strategic leaks to news outlets, real estate watchdogs, local government ethics boards. We printed summaries and mailed them to every homeowner in the neighborhood with return addresses traced to an out-of-state law firm. The crowning jewel? A copy of Sandra's backdoor deals, emails between her and her husband about liquidating stubborn properties, with timestamps, IP logs, and attachments that couldn't be denied. And my wife. She had it all backed up on a private cloud, ready to detonate if anything happened to us. "They want to play spy games," she said, zipping up the case again. "Let's show them what an actual op looks like." It was the first time I saw her smile in weeks, not out of joy but confidence. The calm before a surgical strike. The kind of quiet satisfaction that comes when a predator realizes it's not the only one in the woods. That night I slept better than I had in a month. Not because I thought it was over, but because, for the first time, we weren't just reacting. We were preparing to take the fight to them. It all came crashing down on a Thursday. I remember because the trash truck had just rumbled past our street when the first black SUV pulled up outside Sandra's house. Not a police cruiser, something far more ominous. No sirens. Just quiet authority. The kind that doesn't need noise to make a statement. My wife stood at the living room window, sipping coffee like it was any other morning, while I sat at the kitchen counter pretending to scroll through emails, heart pounding like a drum line. "Showtime," she murmured, not even looking away from the glass. Within minutes, 2 more unmarked vehicles arrived. Men and women in dark suits stepped out, federal from the look of them, and walked briskly up Sandra's pristine stone path. She opened the door in a quilted robe, clearly caught off guard, her face pulled tight like a curtain yanked too fast. She didn't even make it to the end of the porch before they handed her a thick folder and motioned her back inside. A neighbor across the street, watering his begonias, froze mid-spray. You could feel the tension radiating from every home on the block. This was the kind of thing people pretended not to watch, while absolutely watching. Meanwhile, across town, the local paper's website published an anonymous exposé, complete with leaked emails, photos, and a breakdown of the HOA's dirty dealings. The title was bold, surgical: Power, Property, and Predation, an HOA's secret war on its residents. It detailed everything. The extortionate fines. The fake security team. The coordinated evictions. Even named names: Sandra, her husband, 2 board members who'd quietly stepped down just the week before. Within hours, the story went viral. Local news trucks parked just outside our subdivision entrance. Social media lit up with hashtags like #HOA Hustle and #SuburbiaGate. I watched it all unfold in real time. Every 5 minutes brought another nail in the coffin. One homeowner posted a photo of a compliance citation they'd received for leaving their recycling bin visible, next to an image of their medical bills, claiming they'd been fined while recovering from surgery. Another uploaded video footage of Sandra's hired muscle yelling at a teenage boy for riding a scooter on the sidewalk. And then there were the real estate documents, pages of property transfers, showing a disturbing pattern of foreclosures, buyouts, and resale under shell companies. My wife had made sure the press got everything. But she'd also done something smarter. She'd sent the same packet to the county commissioner's office, the Attorney General's Consumer Protection Bureau, and, just to spice things up, a few watchdog nonprofits that specialized in HOA abuse. We didn't hear Sandra scream when she got the call from her husband. But we did hear the thump of something heavy hitting the floor, followed by the squeal of tires as he tore out of their driveway like it was a crime scene. He never came back. That afternoon, the HOA's website went offline. Its Facebook page was flooded with angry comments. And by evening, we received an official community-wide email not from Sandra, but from a hastily convened interim ethics committee, announcing that she had voluntarily resigned due to health concerns. Sure she did. The cherry on top came the next morning. I was outside enjoying the long-missing pleasure of peace and silence, when the guy in cargo pants, the faux security thug, pulled up in a rusty sedan. No more uniform. No more mirrored sunglasses. Just a man in retreat. He stepped out, didn't even walk past the mailbox, just stood at the edge of the sidewalk and said, "Hey, no hard feelings, right?" I stared at him for a long moment. Part of me wanted to walk over and tell him exactly how I felt. Another part wanted to throw his bogus HOA badge at his feet and let him stew in it. But I didn't do either. I just smiled, calm, unblinking. "You should probably leave," I said. And he did. No argument. Just turned and drove off. My wife joined me on the porch, her arms folded loosely, face unreadable as always. "That went better than I expected," I said, still watching the street. She nodded once. Amateurs fold quickly when the light hits them. I looked at her then, really looked, and finally saw her not just as the woman I married, but the professional she'd clearly once been. The one who could dismantle a fake enforcement network with nothing but a dossier, a plan, and nerves of titanium. "You ever think about going back to it?" I asked quietly. "Back to what?" she said, though I saw the ghost of a smirk on her lips. "To whatever you used to do." She didn't answer. Just reached out, took my hand and said, "I think I'm doing just fine right here." And honestly, I couldn't argue. In the days and weeks that followed, the neighborhood began to thaw, as if someone had lifted an invisible pressure valve that had been compressing everyone's lives for years. For the first time since moving in, I saw real neighbors. Not just polite nods over hedges or passive glances at the HOA newsletter, but actual human beings coming together. People who had kept their heads down out of fear of Sandra's wrath began speaking openly, on sidewalks, at mailboxes, even at a hastily arranged community barbecue held in what used to be unauthorized common space. Turns out, we weren't the only ones who had been targeted. A retired Marine down the street admitted Sandra had fined him 3 times for having a veteran's decal on his truck. A single mom confessed that her kids had been followed by the so-called compliance patrol while walking home from the park. One elderly couple shared that they'd moved into their RV temporarily when threatened with foreclosure, too scared to fight. They all had stories. They all had scars. And somehow, seeing the paper tyrant dethroned seemed to loosen their collective silence. It became clear that the HOA had never really been about community. Under Sandra's rule, it had become a tool for leverage, fear, and ultimately quiet profit. But now, there was room for something new to take root. The interim committee quickly dissolved into something more democratic. Real elections were held, for the first time in years, and people actually showed up to vote. Rules were revised, oversight installed, and a third-party mediator was brought in to ensure future compliance issues were handled fairly and transparently. I even joined a subcommittee on digital security, helping modernize the HOA's outdated systems so no one could be harassed anonymously again. But even amid the improvement and redemption, I couldn't help but remain slightly cautious. Not fearful but aware. Aware that even the safest-looking communities can rot from the inside. That power, when unchecked, tends to attract the kinds of people who should never wield it. And that sometimes, the only thing standing between a bully and their goal, is someone who knows how to hit back the right way. My wife never sought praise. She never even admitted what agency she used to work for. But neighbors began to whisper, softly, respectfully. I heard one woman say she thought my wife used to be high-level NSA. Another said she must have been ex-FBI. I didn't correct them. Let them guess. Let them wonder what kind of past a calm, barefoot woman with a garden of herbs and a 1,000-yard stare might be carrying behind her smile. She certainly didn't mind. Her routine stayed the same: early coffee, yoga by the lake, and tending to her basil like it was the most important thing in the world. But I noticed little differences. The way she always locked the back gate twice now. The way she tilted her head when drones passed overhead. And the way she kept the black case, her old tools of the trade, just a little more accessible now. As for me, I slept better. Not just because Sandra was gone or the fake enforcers had slithered off, but because I'd seen what resilience looked like up close. It didn't wear armor or carry a weapon. Sometimes it wore a loose sweatshirt, moved like water and struck with precision only when necessary. The biggest lesson I took away was simple. Peace is worth protecting, but not by surrendering to tyranny in a cardigan. Communities don't thrive when ruled by fear. They thrive when people stand up, speak out, and call nonsense exactly what it is. We'd come dangerously close to being run out of our own home by a woman who thought paperwork gave her the right to intimidate. But she forgot the most important rule in any game of control. You never really know who's behind the door you're kicking down. So now, when new families move in and ask about the HOA, I smile politely and offer to show them around. I tell them it's quiet, peaceful, and mostly drama-free, now. And if they ask what happened to the last board president, I just say she moved. Which is technically true. But between you and me, the real story is much more interesting.